Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. We are in the depths of New England winter, but right now, the race for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire is heating up as more Republicans get into the ring against Senator Maggie Hassan. One of them is New Hampshire State Senate President Chuck Morse, who is our guest this morning in studio. Mr. Senate President, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So those of us who spend a lot of time at the State House know you very well. You've been there for a long time. You served for a long time. You've been a leader there for a long time. But the polling shows that a lot of New Hampshire still needs to get to know Chuck Morse. So let's answer those key questions for voters right now of who are you and why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Yep, I think it's pretty obvious why I'm running for U.S. Senate. Washington's a train wreck, and I honestly believe it's in need of New Hampshire common sense that I can bring there. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to take it all around the state like we've been doing in the Senate forever. And I think that's an important part of putting a plan together. But what we've done here in New Hampshire, being fiscally responsible and producing budgets that meet the needs of the people while driving the economy, which is something the governor and I agreed we had to do coming out of COVID by lowering taxes. That's working for New Hampshire. That's a blueprint that Washington needs right now.
One quick inside baseball question for you. Why didn't you jump into this race in November, strike when the iron was hot as soon as Governor Sununu said he was out? You might have cleared the field.
Yeah, I think anybody that's ever watched me work in the New Hampshire Senate as Senate President knows I take my time, I work through issues, and I've been pretty good about making my decisions in New Hampshire on how to drive this economy and make life better for people in New Hampshire, and that's how I made my decision to run for U.S. Senate.
If you end up being the Republican nominee in November, you're going to be very familiar with your opponent, Maggie Hassan, the U.S. Senator, because she was governor when you were Senate President earlier in this decade. You had a budget that she vetoed. You've been on the other side of the negotiation table from her. So knowing her in those situations when the chips are down, how would you assess her as a politician and a leader?
Well, first, let's talk about what's wrong with Washington right now, because I think that's what this debate will all be about between Senator Hassan and myself. I mean, the Democrats right now in Washington are so liberal, and she's doing nothing about the policies that they're pushing. I mean, the fact that we have inflation where we have it, we have prices going up every day, everybody's seeing that, she's doing nothing to fight any of that. I think that's what the public's seeing here in New Hampshire. We have open borders and, crime and fentanyl. It's all coming to our states, and all because we've left these borders open. The energy policies that she supported in Washington and done nothing about, that's all making a difference. And when we go to have this debate this fall between myself and Senator Hassan, it's pretty simple. She did veto the budget that I passed and I went out and fought for in the state of New Hampshire with the Speaker, and we overrode her veto. That worked. She called a special session to solve problems in New Hampshire. She didn't get anything done because she wanted it to be one side fits all. And that didn't work. And her own party came to me in the Senate and said, let's work together and let's get things done. That's how I've done it in the past. That's how I'll do it in the future. And she doesn't do it that way.
Obviously, there is a huge endorsement that could play a role in this Republican primary, and that is the decision of whether or not former President Trump will pick a candidate in this race. So are you going to go make the pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago, visit Florida and the former president to ask him to back your candidacy?
Well, let's put it this way. The former president will tell you what his decision is going to be on supporting a candidate, but I'd be honored to have that support.
Are you going to go to him and ask for it, though?
I certainly would be honored to get that support.
Do you share Mr. Trump's belief that the 2020 election was stolen from him and he is the rightful president of the United States?
Well, I got to be clear about New Hampshire. We do elections right in New Hampshire, and I'm convinced the fact that the nation knows New Hampshire does elections right. I'm going to continue to support the way we do things in New Hampshire. It's pretty obvious if you're trying to federalize New Hampshire, you're making a big mistake, and that's what Senator Hassan's trying to do.
What about that contention of widespread voter fraud that threw the election to Biden? You're saying that didn't happen here in New Hampshire. Is that an indicator that it did not happen elsewhere in the country?
No, I think I can be very clear. It didn't happen here in New Hampshire, and I mean that. What's happened in the rest of the country, I think people have to look at that and analyze it, but in New Hampshire we run elections right.
So had you been in the U.S. Senate in January 2021, would you have voted with the 8 other Republican senators who objected to the electors from, I think, Arizona and Pennsylvania?
No. Listen, I think the way we work in this state, We do elections right. I support my state. I support what's going on in this state with elections. It works. And I think that's the thing that's wrong right now with Washington. You know, Washington's coming to New Hampshire. I just said they tried to federalize the elections. We shouldn't let that happen. We should be taking New Hampshire to Washington, and that's what I'll do.
So Roe v. Wade, the landmark abortion decision of the 1970s, is probably going to be overturned later this year. Obviously, you're pro-life, and you've supported the new restrictions on abortion that went in, a ban on late-term abortions in New Hampshire that was just approved in the budget trailer bill. But if you have a Republican House and you're in a Republican Senate and you have a Republican president in 2025, would you support a federal ban on all abortions?
No, what we just passed in New Hampshire is right. We passed a late-term abortion. So in the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th month, Senator Hassan can't have the horror of a late-term abortion happening. That's what we passed in New Hampshire. The first 6 months, we worked to make sure that mothers had the right to deal with their own pregnancy. And that's an important piece, and that's what passed in New Hampshire, not some kind of total abortion ban in this state. And I think Senator Hassan, in the way she's explaining it, is lying, and I don't think it's right. We ban late-term abortions in New Hampshire.
So to be clear, if you're in the Senate, you would not vote for a complete abortion ban?
I would vote for what New Hampshire just passed. I think it's the right thing for our state, and I said I'd bring New Hampshire to Washington.
Foreign policy obviously becomes a huge part of your portfolio if you join the U.S. Senate. So let's talk about your philosophy there. Do you believe in kind of a more America first isolationism or more traditional sort of Reaganite expansive foreign policy?
Well, what I see going on in foreign policy right now stems back to all those other policies that are going wrong in Washington. You know, their leadership on energy. You know, we've now become dependent on Russia and OPEC nations. That's wrong. You can't lead your foreign policy any different than all your policies that you're putting in place. Having open borders and just letting anyone cross, you know, 2 million people coming into our country. We don't even know who they are. We don't know what infectious diseases they have. We don't know if they're criminals. We don't know if they're bringing drugs over the border. That all ties to our foreign policy. I think it's been absent on leadership. We need to get back to the basics, make the nation energy independent, and we won't have to kowtow to like Russia. The people that are with us aren't seeing where we're guiding them to. We need to change that. We need to be leaders. And that's what I'd like to bring to Washington, is my leadership.
You know, the crux of the issue really being that, you know, a lot of Americans soured on the idea of any kind of foreign intervention with what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan earlier in this century. Now, obviously, though, we have Russia and China, you know, Russia eyeing Ukraine, China kind of having its eyes on Taiwan. To what extent should America confront these countries about these expansionist tendencies when the American public really doesn't seem to want to get involved in these things?
Yeah, but we're missing the point. We have an open border that we're not confronting right now. We're ignoring the fact that millions of people are coming into our country, yet we're going to go over and get involved with Russia right now on something where we're funding Russia because we're buying their fuel. This makes no sense. We need to, as a country, start to close the borders. You know, that'd be the first thing that I would do going to Washington, because I think that's important, and put the laws in place for immigration that we already have. You know, that'll start to create a foreign policy that needs to happen. Our energy policy needs to go back to what it was a year ago. That's half the problem we're having with inflation right now, is that we made this one-size-fits-all from what the Democrats want to make a new Green Deal work. I think that's all wrong. I think we need to get back to where we were a year ago and go forward from there. It will drive our foreign policy.
Republican voters have shown a real affinity for the outsider lately. Obviously, President Trump is the biggest example of that. Your resume of accomplishment in Concord is extensive, but in a primary, that could get turned around on you. So what are you going to do? How are you going to respond on that Republican primary debate stage when someone calls you a career politician?
Yeah, well, first of all, in New Hampshire, people have to understand, and I don't think I need to explain this to the public, I'm a small businessman first. I have to make a living. I go back home every day. I make that living. The fact that I go to Concord and I represent the people, I'm a volunteer like anyone else in this state. But everything that we've accomplished in this state in driving this economy, lowering taxes, I'm going to bring that to the people. I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of my family first. I mean, but if I want to be proud of something second, it's how I've serviced this country, this state. And I want to take that to the people and talk about it. I mean, I've been doing it in a way that I think the public wants in New Hampshire. They want the values of a New Hampshire businessman to go around the state and talk about how they see they can make a difference. You know, when Republicans are at the table and we're trying to solve problems, that's the way to make it work in this state, and we do it all the time. And I think the public will see that with my campaigning.
What kind of action, if any, would you be taking on the issue of climate change in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, I think I do more for climate change than anyone else out there. I mean, I own a nursery and guidance center. I've been a landscaper. I planted more trees than any of the candidates that are running together, you know, at any point in time. I've been doing it for over 34 years. I think the part of this that bothers me the most is these people that get on airplanes and fly on their little junkets and drink their wine and basically start to discuss how they're going to change the world, and they do it only in the United States. Well, let's start talking about how the world's going to live up to those policies first, because they're not. And I think we do care in this country, and I think we're making exceptional efforts to do that. But it doesn't mean we create an energy policy that's one size fits all. I think we proved that here in New Hampshire. We passed legislation last year that said that can't happen in this state. You know, you have opportunities, you make decisions on what energy policy you want personally. And we kept that here. We need to keep it in Washington.
All right. State Senator Chuck Morse, State Senate President Chuck Morse, U.S. Senate candidate. We're going to have to get used to the duality there, but we appreciate your time on Close Up.
They're all Senate, so you can remember it that way.
You don't have to change the business card if this works out. All right. Thank you for your time, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you.